and I'll cue you. Okay. So when I was doing the analysis in really 1998, starting to do the analysis in 1998, leading up to 2000, I started to notice that there was a systematic deconstruction, systematic destruction of pluralistic policies that were occurring. There was a systematic attack on the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I felt that if there was a systematic attack on pluralistic, cultural, institutional policies, that there could be an imminent financial crisis. Because if the laws that were put in place based on constitutional law were being repealed and attacked, then at some point in time, the financial markets were probably going to be under attack, and that would lead to some kind of financial crisis. So I looked through and started to monitor the violations and direct attacks on the Bill of Rights, constitutional rights, and amendments to the Constitution. And you can really see them. Media censorship. Under the Bush administration, you started to see more media censorship and the inability to get real-time information on proxy wars that were occurring in Afghanistan and in Iraq. There wasn't any news that was really coming out of there. There was no footage, so the media was basically being censored. Media consolidation of ownership. The 1996 Telecommunication Act was a pluralistic policy, debated, passed by both houses in the presidency to diffuse telecommunications technology and to disperse the concentration of telecommunication concentrated power amongst telecommunications companies. And you started to see consolidation and a reversal of the 1996 Telecommunication Acts with consolidation between large multimedia corporations controlling and owning not only newspapers, but radio stations, internet outlet, other types. So you started to see a consolidation and violations of the 96 Act. Reporter incarceration. The lack of shield laws were not being enforced at this time to protect reporters from going to jail and to protecting their sources. You started to see reporters getting thrown in jail. Citizen eavesdropping and wiretapping through special agencies, and Snowden and the WikiLeaks disclosures have given you all the information that you need to know that there was widespread eavesdropping and widespread surveillance of American citizens and international citizens against their will without the subpoenas. Constitutional rights, private prisons and legal systems, Guantanamo Bay, and kidnapping of people in other parts of the world taken to Guantanamo without due process, without any habeas corpus, no due process. So circumventing the due process clauses. Waiver of habeas corpus and due process. Privatization of public property and goods. You started to see public lands being sold off. You started to see private property rights being imposed. You started to see a privatization of social goods and land and parks and natural resources owned by the public that were then sold off to private corporations. Lack of environmental protection and public safety. You've seen drug-related deaths, you've seen food-related deaths, you've seen basically a deregulation of food monitoring and quality, which is manifested into illnesses. And I would say the measles outbreak is a perfect example of a lack of government policy to address epidemics that could start to emerge, because now you have basically religion and politics that are basically coming into the public policy sphere. Taking of individual rights, particularly women and the choice for abortion, is a perfect example. The late-term abortion restrictions imposed, by Republican legislatures and more conservative states. You've seen more of it, not less of it, and again, that's just a taking of individual rights. Again, rights that were guaranteed to you under the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Reclassification of rights. You're seeing linguistics and terminologies being changed, because if they use certain types of language, it triggers limitations in their ability to modify the laws. So by changing the language and calling things something different than it actually is, what allows political influence and reclassification of rights. Unification of church and state. Perfect example is using public funds to fund vouchers for children to go to private Catholic schools. You also are now seeing through the Christian Coalition and other extreme religious organizations have huge political power and influence, particularly within the Republican Party. So now you're seeing a unification of church and state where separation was always really the norm. Lack of government transparency and accountability. To get through the Freedom of Information Act and other acts to get information on policy, on administration, on what is really going on, you have to appeal, and in some cases you can't get the information. And this president, along with the last president, was also very highly secretive and very protective of his executive power and the disclosure of information. And you really do need government transparency. And lastly, taxation without representation, mainly the monetization of the debt. To be able to pass policies that basically incur structural budget deficits on a perpetuity basis, where the government is issuing bonds to basically implement policies that were enacted and negotiated at the congressional level, but with really no citizen input. That's basically taxation without representation. So these were the things that I noticed. And what I noticed, quote unquote, was an institutional deconstruction that is dismantling the pluralistic and democratic institutions by powerful interests within society. The goal is to deconstruct these institutions and replace them with new authoritarian institutions that enforce and redistribute private property rights to privileged interests. And you see it everywhere. And you have to be watching the policies, particularly the budget process, and any policy that is being debated and enacted that's moving through either the lower house or the upper house or to the president. You have to review those policies and go through them and find out if you are in the path of benefits of those policy outcomes, or if you and your company and your firm are in the destructive aspects associated with those policies. And you really have to do the policy analysis to really be able to understand. And I really don't hear or see accounting or finance or economic students doing the policy analysis and being able to figure out the economic consequences, not only in the capital markets, but in the real economy and at the industrial level. Let's break and then do one more.